Hello Internet, Seth Skorkowski, and today we'll be taking a look at the Call of Cthulhu adventure Angel's Thirst, which always sounds kind of dirty to me. Published in 2021, the scenario appears in the Cults of Cthulhu book. For those not familiar with this book, it's a fantastic resource about Cthulhu cults, both detailing out the established ones like the Esoteric Order of Dagon, and guides for making your own cults for your players to encounter. It also includes 3 scenarios involving these cults. One is in the 1890s London, another is in 1920s Los Angeles, and the third is in modern-day Chicago. While they are 3 separate adventures that are spread out over the course of 120 years, they can be loosely linked into kind of a general campaign involving a particular idol. So investigators might be descendants of the investigators from the previous adventure, or might simply have read about their exploits, or at least the players who are going through all 3 adventures are going to see the link between the scenarios, even if their characters do not. Angel's Thirst is the second one of these, set in 1920s Los Angeles. Like the other adventures, it gives the option for either being classic Call of Cthulhu or being in Pulp Cthulhu, which is how we played it when we incorporated it into our campaign. The scenario itself is 50 pages, though that is a bit deceptive really. There are 17 more pages about the particular Cthulhu cult that's involved in the adventure, and then there's a few more pages detailing the new monsters and the new spells that are introduced in the Cult of Cthulhu book, and then they're going to be used in this scenario, meaning the scenario itself is more like 70 pages that's being spread out across different sections of the book. It's a sandbox open style investigation, meaning that once the investigators get the job, there are a lot of different directions it can go. There's sections that they may or may not even discover, multiple ways that clues can be discovered, and there are multiple types of endings that are offered in the adventure. Depending on what allies and alliances the player characters make, it is absolutely fantastic. The cost of that is keepers are going to need to be very organized and very familiar with all the material in order to keep everything straight and adjust with all the moving parts, just depending on whatever it is the player characters do. For example, this was my printout, all studded with tabs, and it was spread out across 3 clipboards when I ran it. Now to help keepers out, Chaosium offers Keeper Map, handout, and reference books as free PDFs on their website, links below. The investigation itself is pretty elaborate, with what starts off as a simple job becomes more and more complex as various factions and elements are uncovered, and each clue leading to more and more questions. It took my group and I about 15 hours of playtime in order to complete, and most of the players were completely baffled how all these seemingly random things were all related to one another until it clicked together right before the end. It is a very well done mystery. So what I'm going to do is offer my tips, my criticisms, and my suggestions as a game master who has successfully run this adventure. And I'm Jack the NPC. I'm here to give it to you from a player's side of things as I get to recount the time I very nearly joined a Cthulhu cult. But before we go any further, I must warn you that there will be spoilers. So any players in the audience, please stop here. Send your game masters this way to see about running Angel's Thirst for you. But if you keep going and you spoil yourself, you'll be sacrificed to unspeakable abominations beneath the waves. Okay, keepers, let's dive in. The adventure involves the Society of the Angelic Ones, a cult that's introduced in the book. I could do an entire video just on this cult, but the short of it is that it's a Cthulhu cult involving Deep One hybrids that set up a huge temple in Venice, California. Founded by Wilma Cartwright, it's fashioned itself more like a Christian church that's focused on angels, where their daughter Elsie is their charismatic minister. It is clearly a nod to the very real Amy Semple McPherson, who led the Foursquare megachurch in the 1920s and 30s Los Angeles. And in 2020, it was depicted in both Penny Dreadful, City of Angels, and also on HBO's Perry Mason origin story. So keepers, I recommend that you might want to familiarize yourself a bit with Amy Semple McPherson, or even check out her other inspired by depictions in order to maybe get some inspiration on playing Elsie as well as her mother. Now, one criticism that I do have about the adventure is the section on the cult gives us NPC portraits for Wilma, Elsie, and some other notable cult members with this art style. But then the adventure itself provides NPC portraits for the expanded cast in this completely different style. So if you're going to be showing your images to your players as they meet these various NPCs, it becomes glaringly obvious that there's a difference in the pictures between these characters. Anyway, sometime back, Wilma Cartwright and her lover Carl Mann, a Deep One hybrid, hatched a plan for Wilma to gain a ton of power from one of the Starspawn that's imprisoned near Los Angeles. To do it, they needed a few items, including 2 statues, a Cthulhu idol as well as a Jade Dancing Girl statue, which the second one isn't necessary to use. You could just use the Cthulhu idol if you want, but the reason that they're both in there is it's kind of linking this adventure off with the others. Wilma had these idols shipped over from England, but what she didn't know is that Sebastiano Lombardo, who owns the shipping company, is a local mob boss. Lombardo, figuring out that the idols are valuable, held them in his warehouse and tried to fleece Wilma for some more money before he'd release them to her. Not appreciating being scammed, Wilma decided to use her cultist and her magic to get her property back. Unfortunately, on the night of the robbery, Elsie Cartwright, who pretty much was a prisoner in her church due to an unplanned pregnancy, she wanted to see what it was that her mother was up to, so she snuck out of the church. She hailed a taxi and went out to the warehouse in time to see cultists and the summoned monsters slaying Lombardo's men and stealing the idols back. The fleeing cultists grabbed Elsie and her taxi driver, Levi Diaz, who witnessed all of this, and they plan on sacrificing Levi and Lombardo's captured men in the coming ceremony on Halloween night. Meanwhile, Carl Mann and several of the Deep Ones from the nearby undersea city of some unpronounceable name really dislike the idea of humans getting a Starspawn's blessing, so he intends on betraying Wilma at that ceremony, releasing the Starspawn from its prison and having it destroy Santa Monica. The module provides us with a timeline of events showing everything that's happened, as well as what will happen if the player characters don't stop at first. Okay, so the adventure begins October 27th, 1922 in Los Angeles. Why the player characters are here is completely up to you. Maybe they're locals, maybe like mine they were visiting from Arkham. The module gives us a keeper and a player map for the city. Unfortunately, one complaint that I have with the player version is the inset magnified sections for Beverly Hills and Venice of America not only cover up large portions of the Los Angeles map, their presence themselves draws attention to those areas being particularly important for this adventure, so I really wish those had been separate and we just had a map of Los Angeles as well as separate maps for those two insets. The player characters are contacted by Selena Diaz, daughter of the kidnapped cab driver Levi Diaz, who's been missing for a week now, and the police really haven't made any progress on this.
"Aw, sure thing, no problem. Just one question, though. We're in LA on vacation, so how did you even hear about us, let alone look us up? It seems kind of like a weird thing to request from a bunch of random tourists."
Now for my game, I went with the idea that Selena is a psychic and learned about the investigators in her dreams. Also, because a couple of the player characters in our group had also done the Star on the Shore and Waiting for the Hurricane adventures, those involved Deep Ones and Starspawn, she directly referenced those exploits that no one could have possibly known about. So while she didn't mention Deep Ones or Starspawn to the players, I knew that the relation between those adventures, by merely just suggesting them, would kind of become obvious later on of why she mentioned those. All she knew that her father was still alive, but was somewhere deep beneath the earth, and he was in imminent danger, so she was pleading the player characters to please help find him.
"Oh, well then if you're familiar with my previous work, then who am I to turn down a fan? No worries at all, Selena. We will find your dad, no problem." Guys, she knows too much. We might need to take her out.
One of the reasons that I like Selena being a psychic character is that just in case the player characters get stuck at some point in the adventure, she can contact them with some sort of fresh revelation that she learned from her dreams, or maybe she can remind them how many days that her father has to live, because she heard that in her dream. So hopefully that'll motivate the player characters to work a little bit faster. When checking the cab company, we first encounter with a crooked cabbie that really didn't offer much except for just confusing my players, so I really didn't think that added anything to the adventure to have them initially encounter this crooked cabbie. This adventure is complicated enough without him. Now, once they do get to talk to a manager, we get some useful information from them. Now, one thing that the module doesn't discuss, and I knew my players were going to ask about, is the meter and the log from Levi Diaz's abandoned taxi cab. Now, I know nothing personally about 1920s taxi meters, but from what I was able to learn by some Google searching and asking around, a meter would be able to say how far the cab had traveled since it had picked up its last fare. But by the time the cab was discovered, the mechanism had wound all the way down, meaning that the car was still running at the time that he had vanished. As far as the taxi cab driver's log, I told him that because, customers were so often in a rush, Levi was known to fill all that out once the fare had ended and he had a couple minutes alone in the car, something that his manager had reprimanded him about before, but he just continued doing it. So that last fare that was noted in the log was Betty Guthrie, who the cab company had known about because she had scheduled the pickup, but there were no other log entries after that. Alternatively, keepers could say that the driver's logbook was taken by the cultist and was missing, or maybe had that final page torn out. Just some thoughts that in case your players do ask about those things, you can have an answer ready for them. They can say that, the meter was left running, so that serves as a confirmation that Levi had picked up a fare at the time that he had vanished, so that itself is a clue. But keepers, you just might want to prepare for it. That way, when your players ask, you aren't just suddenly kind of wondering like, oh God, I hadn't considered the meter before. So just some thoughts. Now, checking out the street where the abandoned cab was discovered, which we also get a player copy for this map. I wish the player copy didn't show the warehouse interior on it. It kind of draws attention to this warehouse as being an important building, while also giving away the layout of the building. So keepers probably just cut out the top corner showing the street and give them that until they try to get into the warehouse, and then you can give them the full map. Asking the businesses if they saw anything that night is likely going to tip off Lombardo that they were snooping around and asking some questions.
Also, by sheer coincidence, the only business on this corner that was not paid off by the mob is Swanson's Furniture, and two of our player characters just happened to have the last name of Swanson, so they were like, we are going right there. And it turns out that they were related to the Baltimore Swansons and not the Arkham Swansons, and a little bit of rivalry there. But we ended up getting a pretty good furniture set from them to go in that house that we bought at the end of the Crimson Letters.
Interviewing the various NPCs eventually leads them to the Society of the Angelic Ones, who have this huge and weird church that they've built in Venice. Visiting the church or attending any of the services can be really easy to do. Their schedule is posted several places. Characters might notice strange symbols that are carved along it, and a successful Mythos roll is going to realize that the script is Reliant, and it's gathering and focusing all the energy from the people inside the church and channeling it downwards, down somewhere beneath the church. Now, keepers, I suggest that you copy these glyphs from the page and they show them to any of the players that notice them, though you're still going to need to have them make a roll in order to identify what those symbols are. Interacting with the church members, they get to meet several of the characters, including Wilma, and if they play their cards right and make the right rolls, they'll get to meet Elsie.
Now, here was another one of those crazy coincidences. See, when we first met Elsie, she was reading a copy of Margaret Murray's Witch Cults of Western Europe, which just so happens to be one of our player characters' most favorite books in the entire world. In fact, that character has written on her character sheet, written long before we even knew about this adventure, that her most prized possession is an autographed copy of that book. So when she first met Elsie, she was like, oh my God, we are about to be best friends.
Now at this point while running the game where they were meeting Wilma and Elsie is where I had a little bit of trouble with the scenario's layout. Information about the meeting Wilma is on page 256, but information on meeting Elsie is on page 261. So there were a couple details that I knew were in the adventure because I had read them in advance, but during the game itself, as we were role-playing it out, I didn't want to stop the game and have to search this book, flipping back and forth, trying to find whatever particular information it was that I needed. This was also the scene where my group had some really great rolls. First, psychology rolls noticed that Elsie was afraid of her mother, but also that Elsie was pregnant. The module never discusses who the father is, leaving that up to the keeper to decide who the father is or what the father is. Second, between their previous experience with different Cthulhu cults and previous adventures and role-playing and making some killer mythos, occult, and fast talk rolls, they were able to convince Wilma that they were knowledgeable worshippers of the Cthulhu mythos, and they had kind of never stepped beyond the initial stages of a neophyte, but they actually were Cthulhu worshippers, and they were very interested in joining in this church. So it completely outed her as being this cultist. They just said it right out, and they knew what this church really was. So it's kind of this confession, kind of incriminating themselves of, I know what you are, but that's cool, I want to join you. So Wilma, hoping to benefit from having several of these wealthy player characters, as well as some pretty knowledgeable practitioners that would now be underneath her, and therefore easier for her to exploit and possibly eliminate them as threats, she invited them to this special ceremony Monday night where Elsie was going to call forth the Scarlet Ones, and several of their own recruits in this cult would be inducted into the full congregation. And being that this was, they had already taken their initial vows, at least they claimed, they made the rolls to convince her that they had actually done that, they clearly knew their stuff, so they were invited to join the cult.
Oh, wow, of course. Yes, I would love to. I mean, yeah, this is going to end up being a murderous evil cult and all, but you know what? Getting invited into an exclusive club always makes you feel pretty special.
Now, this was all being improvised by me, though the module does suggest that Wilma might invite them to see the Scarlet Ones, possibly to convert them or as a means of getting rid of them. However, her motivation behind doing that invitation wasn't because they were, directly threatening her or anything like that. So this really was a sincere attempt trying to recruit my player characters. I also decided that Monday night was going to be best to have this sort of ceremony because that was going to be the night before Halloween when they've got the big ceremony, so she wanted to bring in as many members to her congregation as possible before the night of this big ceremony, and that was already scheduled, so Monday night was a good night to do it. Now, the characters, if they're researching this temple, they can find blueprints in the public records, but a deeper investigation, such as interviewing the architect, can discover the real blueprints that shows a hidden room beneath it. But thanks to some hilariously failed social roles, my players never managed to talk to the architect and get to the second blueprint. But because they deduced that the church was drawing power down and from the congregation and channeling it to somewhere beneath it, they figured out that, yeah, there was definitely a hidden temple beneath this church.
You know, guys, every single Cthulhu cult that we have faced always had some sort of big pool of water in the main temple room that the Deep Ones could use to swim out from the ocean, pop up underneath the temple, and get inside. So, since this church is built on an island and all, I'm thinking there's gonna be some sort of tunnel leading from one of those canals up underneath the church and popping up in the main temple room. So, all we gotta do is find it.
Now, the module doesn't have any sort of pool or tunnel leading from the canals underneath it or anything like that, but I completely agree with what my player character suspected here as being something that should be a thing. After all, the pool connecting it to the ocean was in Waiting for the Hurricane and in the movie Dagon, so it made sense that it would have it. So, for my game, I added a pool that was inside the temple room, but reaching it required a combined hard constitution and swimming check, to go through the dark underwater passage in order to come up underneath this temple. So they had one character, they went out at night, he went through, he swam, it was in the dark because they didn't have any light source down there because it was wet and 1920s flashlights and all, but the scouting character failed to make his roll, so he decided not to push the roll, so he swam back out before he drowned, so they never were able to go through that passageway in order to pop up and confirm their suspicions, but I really do think that is a cool addition, and that's something that keepers might want to add to this adventure, kind of as a little feature or a possible secondary entrance that their players could use if they do kind of come up with that same idea. Eventually, either because they looked up who owned the suspicious warehouse near where Levi Diaz had disappeared, or because he'd been tipped off that the PCs were asking around about him and he sent his goons out to go pick him up, the player characters are going to meet Lombardo, owner of Lombardo Shipping. They're going to meet in his main office site. Now, one nit here is the keeper map says that his office is location 4, but nothing on this map is marked with a 4, so I chose this office to be his. But in retrospect, I think that this office would have been better due to the overall placement and because it has a private bathroom. If they can earn his trust, the player characters are going to learn that Lombardo blames Wilma for his dead and missing men. Now, he isn't interested in cults or magic or missing cab drivers or anything like that, but he is willing to help out the player characters in order to take her down. Now, one optional event that's presented in the module and can happen at any point during the adventure is an attempt on Lombardo's life. One way it could be done is there's gunmen that are sent by Wilma and they're cultist gunmen. And the other way you could do it, and this is the one that I used when I ran the adventure, is as the meeting was wrapping up. Carlman, the Deep One hybrid boyfriend of Wilma, is worried that Lombardo might muck up his plans, so he had his idiot brother Dougman lead a group of Deep Ones to kill him. Now, I had the investigators roll a very hard listen check to notice that the shipping yard had grown suddenly quiet outside because Doug had sent all the longshoremen away.
Listen, you guys smell something?
Several Deep Ones smashed their way inside. I also had Lombardo's men check the player characters for weapons before meeting with Lombardo, so they initially started this fight out being completely unarmed. Though during the fight itself, Lombardo told one of the player characters when they were kind of fighting these things to reach up under his desk and grab that sawed-off shotgun that had been mounted under there and had been pointing at them the whole time that they've been talking. Now, the module never says how Lombardo feels about there being actual monsters, so in our game I had him made a sanity save, and he was oddly accepting accepting of it, and the player characters were able to convince them that, this was something that they were familiar with, so he had all the Deep One's bodies dumped somewhere far offshore. Now, if the player characters can capture and interrogate Doug, he is going to confess to him how his brother sent him there, and even how Carl plans to betray Wilma if Doug thinks that, might give him some leniency of like, well, you don't like Wilma? Well, we don't like her either, so why don't we all team up? Carl Mann lives in an old house that's overlooking the ocean. There's paperwork in the church that the player characters might find that might send them there. There's no need to interrogate Doug, even though I think interrogating Doug is actually the best way of getting this information. Confronting Carl can go several ways. He might offer a truce, recruiting the player characters to help him disrupt this ceremony, saying that this cannot be allowed to succeed. Or it could just be a big fight once they meet him. There's a few Deep Ones that are here as well that'll join in this fight and make it nice and fun and thrilling. Now for my game, I added a concealed door between the caverns and the cellar. I also added a little Deep One gold here, as he was a gold trader who was selling Deep One gold, and I figured it could make for a nice windfall that the player characters could have. The module talks about using some accounting rolls to see how much gold Carl has invested away, but the NPC stats form do not list a credit score for Carl, so I figured a credit of 60 is probably appropriate to give him.
Holy crap! There has got to be 10 grand worth of gold right there, guys. I love it when fighting the Mythos actually pays the bills for once.
Also searching Carl's house, they could find information about a gas station that he owns that's outside of Angels National Forest, as well as receipts for a recently built underground storage facility there. Now, while they're interrogating him, they might be able to get directions to the ritual site. I went ahead and had him discover Handout 4, which are the directions the player characters could also get from Elsie. I figured, Carl maybe made this map for his Deep One accomplices for that night, so he went ahead and I gave him the map there. Heading out to the National Forest, the investigators can discover Levi Diaz and the rest of the kidnapped victims beneath the gas station. At that point, having rescued them, the original mission that the player characters were hired to do is complete. However, even if you remove the sacrificial victims, that isn't going to stop Wilma's ceremony at all. She's simply going to draw new victims among her followers and sacrifice them. Now, the ceremony can go off several different ways. First, some crooked police have set up a roadblock preventing anyone from getting out there unless they have the right password. Now, depending on how things went, the player characters, they could have been captured at some point in this adventure. They might find themselves, stick to the ground as being the planned sacrifices for the night, only to discover that their ropes might not be fully secure, and maybe one of them can get away and get the rest of them out, and now we've got a harrowing moment as all the cultists are around them. After the Crimson Ones are summoned, which kicks off this huge drug-fueled orgy, which what starts off as this epic Halloween party turns pretty dark as this Mythos monster is called to tear apart and consume all the sacrificial victims. Then, depending on what the player characters have done up to this point, Wilma might be blessed with incredible power, or the Deep Ones might attack and they might summon the Star Spawn to level the city, or the cult, maybe they could stop them. Maybe Lombardo can be recruited and maybe send some gunmen out there to help stop them, some guys with Tommy guns hiding in the bushes. Or maybe Levi Diaz can, if they rescued him early enough, he can get some of his friends, the other cab drivers, to come out there and help them. Now, maybe Wilma or Elsie, one of them might escape. There's a whole lot that can happen. In our game, when I ran this, Elsie ended up getting away. Actually, they let Elsie go, because once they'd killed Wilma, Elsie was like, okay, wow, I'm free, and she just ran away, and the player characters felt a little bit endeared to her, so they found Elsie up in the church. She was emptying out the safe, and she ended up telling him where Levi Diaz was. Now, once the smoke clears, the adventure is done. Overall, I really do like this adventure. However, it has a lot of moving parts to it, and keepers are going to have to be very prepared and very organized in order to quickly find any information they need, as well as to adapt any changes that they might have to do on the fly without slowing down the momentum of the game.
But we had a blast with it. Yeah, the job starts off simple enough. We gotta find a missing cab driver for his sweet little girl. But the further we kept digging into this, we found evil cults, Deep Ones, mobsters, crooked cops, some sort of demented mother that pimped her daughter out to an architect so she could then blackmail that architect into building a secret room underneath her church for nefarious reasons. And we haven't even touched on the fact that Wilma's got 2 other children that also happen to be Deep One hybrids, so yeah, there's also that. So every time we'd find a clue, we'd try to guess what it would be, what it would lead to, and we were never right. We're always like, what the hell's this got to do with anything else? And ain't none of it got to do with a missing cab driver, until the very end of the adventure when we got that final piece of information and everything clicked right into place.
You can find the Cults of Cthulhu book on the Chaosium website as well as DriveThruRPG. It's over 350 pages of great information as well as this adventure. I suggest checking it out. Links below.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of our stuff such as game reviews, RPG philosophy, just hit that subscribe button. Till next time, investigators, you have a great day. You know, you didn't even tell the story about that time I nearly joined a freaking Cthulhu cult.
Nearly? Dude, you took the oath before the priestess.
Yeah, but those are just words. I was operating undercover at the time trying to infiltrate them.
Then you put on a ceremonial gown and you swam across the pool to the altar, baptizing yourself in the waters.
Yeah, but if I hadn't done that, they would have known that I was faking it.
Then you took the sacrificial knife that the cultist was offering you.
Yeah, I snatched it right out of his hand and I stabbed his ass with it.
But his body then fell into the pool, meaning that his blood mixed with the waters where dead Cthulhu lies dreaming.
Yeah, but it wasn't that poor chump that they brought in to be sacrificed. That guy lived. It was the cultist that died.
And you think that Great Cthulhu cares whose blood was spilled in his waters by his sacrificial knife by somebody who had just given an oath to him?
Well, crap.